Okay, it's the 144,000 project. Rev 9 video, it's video 48. Starting Hebrews. So, this is kind of like Revelation. I said Revelation is kind of a summary of everything that happens in the Bible in a sense. Well, at least all the prophecies that apply to the return of Christ, in other words. Okay, so this is kind of a summary of the Bible. Okay, and the second return of Christ and all that as it applies to the 12 tribes, not Gentiles. Okay, so let's just start. Hebrews 1:1. God, having of old spoken to our forefathers in many portions and forms by the prophets, at last in these times spoken to us by a Son. Well, actually, he spoke to them by a Son to begin with, to their forefathers, starting with Abraham, which was the faith of Abraham. Now, all this will bear out, and we'll see it. It's all in Hebrews. All right, verse 2, whom he appointed inheritors. So the Christ was appointed the inheritor of all. By all, he meant all 12 tribes, all Jews for Christ. However, you know, we've already been over Jews against Christ versus Jews for Christ, wheat versus tares. So, all believers, and all through whom he made the ages, who being the... Alright, so you can read all that. Alright. However, you get to verse 4, thus becoming by so much superior to the messengers, meaning the regular angels, insomuch as he inherited a more distinguished power. So Christ inherited a more distinguished power than regular angels, because he inherited us, the 12 tribes. For, and then he makes his point, for when did he ever say to any of the messengers or the angels, you are my son? So the other angels were created beings, but he didn't call them, you know, my son, because calling them my son, this is the, in other words, none of the angels were born as humans, right, from the Spirit of God, and only Christ was. We don't know of any other sons, right? Although some people almost seem to teach it that way. At any rate, so he's pointing out this Psalms 2:7, which we've already been to, is first thing in Psalms about Christ, which is the basis for the teaching of the first verse of the New Testament, Christ the Son of David. Well, there you go. That's where it starts, right there in Psalms 2:7. All right, now you can see Acts 13:33 is the other cross-reference, and we've been there, so you can look at that. Everybody knows Psalms 2:7. They've probably been taught that multiple times, and they should know 2 Samuel 7:14. Both of those go right back to Acts 13:33, right? Which is this chapter in Acts about the Gentiles, right? Okay. So, and also goes up Hebrews 5:5 right below, which also quotes Psalms 2:7. Alright, so, second quote then, I will be, well, okay, well, yeah, today I have begotten you, that was Psalms 2:7, and the second part, I will be a father to him, he shall be a son to me, that's Samuel 7:14, and we all know 7:14 is about Christ, and then if you look on my chart, you see that that's about also about the 12 tribes being redeemed forever. So there's your context of Christ over the 12 tribes, Christ the Redeemer, and the 12 tribes redeemed forever. Alright? So that's making his point then about who inherited, and then you go to Psalms, Christ then in Psalms inherited the 12 tribes, and Christ in 2 Samuel inherited the 12 tribes and redeemed them forever. So that's the context he wants you to go look when you look this stuff up. And that puts this in the context. He's talking about Christ redeeming the 12 tribes, not the whole world. But when he again introduced the Creator, or some might say first fruit, into the habitable world, he says, let all the messengers or angels of God honor him. Okay, so that's the Psalms 97:7 quote. And then he goes, but as to his messenger, he only says, making a distinguish between the other angels. So, it should say when he introduced the Redeemer into the habitable world, because that's what Christ was, is the Redeemer. So let's go look at 97:7. See what the context of that is. The Lord is king, let earth be glad, and let all isles rejoice. Well, isles are, like I said, where those Hebrews were, over in Ireland, England, and then they were in Spain, which was the Iberian Peninsula, and they were in France and Germany and all those other countries right up through there. And went around to Denmark, and so that's what it means when it's talking about isles. Clouds and gloom surround him. Yes, well, right and justice, he fixes his throne. Yes, this is a righteous justice system based on his law, which is what he'll set up when he gets back, and everyone in the world will abide by that. Fire before him marches, flame surrounds his foes, his lightnings light the spheres. That means lightning on earth. It all comes from manifestation of Christ, in a sense, right? The earth looks on and quakes, the hills like wax dissolve. Well, we heard that before. Before the Lord, before the King of earth, which is Christ, the skies proclaim his power. All tribes will see his glory. Fall down, you idle slaves who worship what is not. That's Jews against Christ. To him subject your God. So it's telling, in other words, he's punishing or giving justice on the Jews against Christ, which we've seen multiple prophecies already. And then again, hear Zion and be glad, let Judah's girls rejoice, because the Lord is judge. Right. Right. For you, Lord, are on high, that's verse 9, supreme over all earth and over all powers, who love the Lord and hate vice. His saints lives, he preserves his saints, in other words, who live. Those are Jews for Christ. And frees from wicked hands, he sows light for the good and joy for upright hearts. So obviously he's talking about giving justice on the Jews against Christ, and then redeeming, resurrecting the Jews for Christ. Simple. Let the righteous rejoice in the Lord, right? And thank for remembering his saints. About resurrection. Alright. But what about the rest of the context of being 12 tribes? Well, if you want to get the 12 tribes context, simply back up one chapter and go forward one or two chapters, in other words. Okay, so here you got Christ, the rock of hope, back in 94, at the end of 94. There's Christ, the rock. And you start with 95. Come on, let's cheer the Lord. Hooray for that rock we trust. So there's Christ the rock, and the people that trust in Christ the rock. So that's Jews for Christ. Great King. His hands have molded its tribes. So that's the potter over the clay. And that's 95:5. Let's bow down to the life who has made us, which is exact context of all this formed in the womb that we saw over and over and over in Isaiah. It must be mentioned 20 times. For he is our God, we are his race, his flock, sheep of his hand. Okay, well that sounds like 12 tribes. And it says, today if you listen to my voice, so we're in 95:8. And what does he talk about? I strove 40 years with that race, so he's getting off on these people that he brought out of Egypt, who he strove with for 40 years. And then he mentions those who would not learn. Then I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Isn't that the book of life? Okay, well, we know who he's talking about right here. In Psalms 95, we know it's Jews against Christ, Jews for Christ. At the very beginning, it's the ones that are for him, and then below he's talking about the ones he strove with that he took out of the book of life. Okay? which exactly what 97 was about, the ones he's going to judge. All right. So there's your context. It has to be Israel right there. And then 96, glory proclaims to the nations his wonders to all of the tribes. That's 12 tribes in 96:3. Okay. And he talks about some that are against him. Give to the Lord tribes and peoples, or kindreds and peoples. All right. That's 12 tribes. He talks about burnt offerings. Only the 12 tribes gave him burnt offerings. Okay. And then he uses this word spheres, so all these flat earth people should take notice of all the times he talks about the earth and all the rest of heaven being spheres. And his people he governs by laws. Think God's law, verse 10, 96:10. Okay, comes to give justice on earth, to govern its circuit by the right and its peoples by truth. That's how 96. And the justice, who did he say the justice was for? Well, right there in Psalms 95. So you got to read these. They all connect to each other. They're all in the same context. You got to read forward and back. So that's what we see behind 97. If you go to 98, look at like 98, 99, all those. Well, what do you see in 98? Sing a new song. That's for these people who's resurrected. That's what you see in Revelation. He has saved by his hand and by his holy arm. Again, same context we saw in Isaiah about saving people by his arm, and they would bring them out of captivity and everybody would see. Of course, we don't know what his arm, uses that term, we don't know exactly. Show the eyes of the nations his might. So all the nations will see the might of the Lord when he brings his people out of captivity. To Israel's house, that's 98:3. Again, to the 12 tribes. Tell his kindness and truth. Okay. Sounds like 12 tribes, because of the context. And then at the end of 98, to the Lord who has come to rule the earth with justice, to govern the world, all the peoples by right. Righteous justice system is what he's coming back. Judge on the people who don't want him, that kind of thing. Okay. But we're sure it's the 12 tribes. We'll go to 99. Just read down through 99. The Lord's great in Zion and high above all the tribes. Do you think it's all the tribes of the earth or all the tribes in Zion? Okay. Verse 4. You mighty king, love justice, who fixed the just men's rights, and kindness showed to Jacob. Didn't say he showed Jacob or resurrected anyone other than Jacob and the tribes who were the Jews for Christ. Alright. If you're just going down, what about verse 6? Moses, Aaron, and his priests. Sounds like it's talking about 12 tribes. They called the Lord, and he replied, God from the pillar of cloud. Verse 7. They kept the proofs and the laws he gave. That's 12 tribes. No other context. Not saving the world. Does it say that? Absolutely puts the context of what it just quoted back here in Hebrews 1:6. This Christ is coming to redeem the 12 tribes at Judgment Day, which is exactly the same context of all of the prophecies about the return of Christ. Which is why he quotes this. You just got to go look it up. Okay. So he introduced Christ. All the messengers of God honor him. So that's 7:7. Okay. But as to his angels, he only says he makes his angels spirits and his ministers burning fire. And that's 104. Now, same context. So, and 45, 6 and 7, same context. Alright, well, I guess we'll just have to look it up and see if that's what all this context is about. It's about Christ coming to redeem the 12 tribes, at least the ones who believe on him, and judge the ones who don't believe. Wheat and tares. Okay, so let's go look at Psalms 104, see if it's the same. Just a few pages from where we just were. 104. 4. So, starts out, let my soul bless the Lord, how great you are, Lord God, how in splendid beauty you are clothed, the light wraps like a cloak, the skies flow like a veil, it builds his tent on either, in other words, up in the sky, and the clouds, his chariots form on wings of winds proceed, his couriers are the storms, his agents are flames of fire. Which, could be lightning, because he just talked about lightning in the previous one. He fixed the earth on laws, unchanged throughout all times. That means forever. The earth will follow law, and it has laws of, runs on laws. Everything we're all looking at the laws of science. Then we reveal that there's other laws besides the ones we knew. There's others, and we're always finding new ones. Seas overwhelmed the hills, your command, they fled, your loud voice. So in other words, everything on earth follows his command. Mountain rose. So you can read it on, but if you're just going down, of course this goes down to 35. So, in other words, he fixed the moon her times in 19. Same thing, that they go by his laws, which he already set up. So he runs everything. Basic way of looking at, you sing creative breath, the face of earth renews. So that's verse 30. God's power is eternal. And he frowns at the earth, it trembles. Okay. I sing to the Lord for life. I chant to God forever. That's 33. My thought of him is sweet. My joy is in the Lord. Let sinners die and villains cease to be. But my soul, bless the Lord, give honor to the life. Yeah. Okay, well, there's your difference between Jews for Christ, Jews against Christ. Okay. But how do we know any of that's about the 12 tribes? Oh. Well, go to 105. Start reading 105. You read down, what do you see? Get down to verse 5. The portents and judgments he gave. Race of Abraham, his friends, sons of Jacob, his chosen. Sounds to me like, that's the posterity of Abraham right there. Verse 6. Who he gave judgments to. That's the whole point of the royal priesthood, to administer his law and give proper justice. Oh, okay, and if you keep going, remembers his bond for thousands of ages with Abraham he fixed. So he fixed his covenant with the posterity of Abraham for thousands of ages. All right, we haven't been through thousands of ages yet. Okay, which to Isaac he promised. So with Abraham he fixed his covenant, which went to Isaac, settled it with Jacob, the bond made with Israel. Verse 10. So it sounds to me like the context is the 12 tribes, because then you go on down talking about them, in Egypt and this and that. Aaron chose Aaron. Okay. Gave them the heathen lands and all the things he did for them. Kind of sums up Psalms 105. All about 12 tribes, not about someone else. When you get to 106, no, still about 12 tribes. So what about 103? Well, if you go back to 103, well, you've got some things here. Yeah, I don't guess you could say you can be real definitive, but like 103, crown me with mercy and love, fill me with beauty and grace like an eagle. The Lord will effect what is right, give justice to all the oppressed. To Moses he made known his way, and his power to Israel's sons. Okay, he said he would only give his power to the 12 tribes. Well, there you go. There they are. He only had mercy to people who followed his law. Okay. Well, it's 103. And to ever on those who fear him, that's verse 18, who keep and remember his laws, and to those who obey his commands, verse 18. Well, there you go. That's who gets the mercy, the ones who follow his law. That's 103:18. Okay. So, at any rate, and it was given his power to Israel's sons, which are the 12 tribes, 103:7. So there's your context. Before and after, both are 12 tribes. Alright, and since we're here, and you scroll down, you see we got 102:25. We're almost there, so let's just go back to 102:25. Which is really just before where we were. It says it's the same context. Alright, well let's just look at 102 then. We already know it's about 12 tribes, so we just read it. Alright. Days in, my bones burn like coals. So it says a prayer for the afflicted. It doesn't say if it's David or who. Okay. I'm dried up. You, Lord, forever remain. Your memory to ages of time. It's 13. Rouse up your pity for Zion. Okay. Well, we know that's about the Israel people for the time for her comfort. Okay, this is when Christ returns, when we have her comfort, when he ends all war. That's the comfort. For your servants delight in her stones. Her dust is comfort to them. Alright, the stones are those white stones in Revelation. Then the heathen will fear the Lord's name. Okay, if they're not fearing it right now, that's when he returns, when they have their white stones, their administrators over his law. The comfort is the end, no more war. Okay. And his glory, all kings of the earth, when the Lord rebuilds Zion. And of course, that's when the house of God are judged, and at the end of that, that's when he brings these Gentiles in to help rebuild Zion, which they participated in its destruction. Now they're going to help rebuild it. But now they recognize who the 12 tribes are. Okay. In his splendor, he then will appear. Right? Okay. Remember when he comes and says, "Here I am," in the other prophecy? Alright, so, write this to the ages to come, verse 19, a race to be made, and will praise God. Well, we know what this race is. Been reading about it in this whole book. From the Lord, his high dwelling, he looks, he bent from the heavens to earth to hear how the prisoners sighed and set free his children. Now, who are his children? Could it be this race he mentioned right above, which would praise God? Yeah. We only see one group of people made from the beginning. Chosen, the elect. So, publish in Zion the power of the Lord, that's 23. In Jerusalem give to him thanks, let all peoples assemble together. That's all peoples in Jerusalem. And kingdoms to worship the Lord. Okay. So, we should be looking for 25. So we're at 23. He seemed reaping my days in his power, but I said, take me not in the midst of my time, for your years are from ever to ever. From before you had founded the earth, on your hands had constructed the sky. They may perish, but you will remain. And they all like a garment wear out, but you change them like a cloak, and they change. In other words, when you change them. But your years will not end, and the sons of your servants will last, and before you their race will remain. Well, the race of the chosen people is royal priesthood, we talked about from the beginning, when they came out of Egypt. No change of context. And this is an end-time return of Christ. Okay? Psalms 45, 6 and 7. Alright. It says, meditate, song of the affections. Okay. Maiden brides, how it starts. My heart overflows with pleasant thought. I tell my doings to the king. A rapid writer's pen my tongue, telling to the king. And the king, of course, is the king of righteousness. And then it says, David, you're fairer than a child of Adam. Now there's lighter complexion. Your graceful lips express it well, so may God bless you forever. And then the bride, your sword gird on your thigh for courage, fame, and honor. For honor, drive your chariot, and for the sake of truth, seek out and help the right. And honor is your right hand. Your darts will pierce nations, because before you they will fall. Aim at your foeman's heart. Your throne, prince, is forever. Well, he's really talking about Christ. Okay, and the cross reference then would be, or the quote would be, Hebrews 1:8 or 1:9, yeah. I've got it listed up here as 9, so. Alright, so, your throne, prince, is forever. Your kingdom's staff, the right. You love the right, hate the wrong. So God, your God, anoints with sweeter oil than your friends. Your garments smell of cassia myrrh, from ivory jars to make you glad. He's talking about Christ, the scepter, in other words, from Genesis 49:10. On you, king's daughters, wait. A queen stands at your right, in lace of woven gold. Here, girl, look and attend. Forget your tribe. King desires your love. Bow to him as your Lord. Tyre's daughter brings you gifts. The wealthy nations come. Okay. Talking about the nations of the 12 tribes and this wedding feast at the end of Revelation chapter 19 that we read about. In other words, all 12 tribes being wed back to him, and that's, the 12 tribes. In other words, it's not a person, it's the tribes that we read about in Revelation, the wedding feast and all that. Okay? Of course, to the bride, your sons instead of father will send provincial lords, forget your name forever, and the tribes will always love. That's how it sums up at the end of 45. So, now, if you want to get specific about the 12 tribes, well, not a whole lot, but you could go to the glory of Jacob in 47, about the chosen. Alright, so if you go to 47:5, you see about the chosen, the glory of Jacob, he loved. And then God's the king over nations, holy throne, princes of people, with the people of Abraham's God, in verse 10. Of course, the children and the princes it's talking about are the 12 tribes, the royal priesthood. So that's about as specific as it gets right here. It does talk about New Jerusalem, God's holy hill. And if you look back to 44, talking about judging the vile tribes. But then when you get to 44 verse 5, who orders for Jacob's success? You are a leader in God, right? So those are Jews for Christ. Those ones that hate Christ are Jews against Christ. If you want to look through that. So, same thing. Talking about forgetting the name of our God. So, okay, well, who would already know that? In other words, murdered all day, we treated like sheep to be slain. That's verse 23 of 44. So, and we understand that idea. And then they're to be redeemed at the end of 44. So, again, 12 tribes are redeemed. That's the context in other verses. So this is the same. I'm just talking about different people all of a sudden. Alright, so we looked at 45, 102, and then 110. Of course, we know 110. So let's go back to Hebrews then. That's 12. So, okay, we didn't get way up there. We kind of knocked off back here around verse 7. Alright, so in 1:8, Great Prince, your throne is forever and ever. The scepter of justice is the scepter of your kingdom. You love righteousness, hate lawlessness. Okay, well that's actually what we just read. It's talking about Christ. Yours will not be eclipsed. That's 12. And when did he say to any of the angels, sit at my right hand until I place an enemies a stool for your feet? So he's making, in other words, he's talking about Christ being his son, being an angel, but higher than the angels. So he's distinguishing between just regular angels that he created and this one he made for his son to be a representative of him, and speak directly from him. So then in 14, are they not all ministering spirits dispatched to administer for the sake of those who will ultimately inherit salvation? Alright, so the angels minister to the 12 tribes, to the royal priesthood, who will ultimately inherit salvation, Jews for Christ. Same thing, Stephen's defense was, didn't he say, didn't you learn all this from the agency of angels? See? Well, who's he talking about? He's saying the agency of angels will just come to anybody on earth whenever they call it Christ and teach them, protect them, be Christ a shield to them and do all that? Or is the context always in the context of his elect people being the 12 tribes, the royal priesthood and so forth? It's always 12 tribes. It's never about the world. So, now that rap about footstool and enemies, that's Psalms 110. We've read the rest. It says Mark 12:36. So we go back to Mark. Just say Mark or Matthew. Not sure what I just said. Mark. Okay. Say Mark. Mark 12:36, Psalms 110. Oh yeah, it does go to Matthew because it goes to Matthew 22:34. Okay, 22:34. No, it goes to 22:44. Okay. Christ to crush Satan at the end time. It's about having the footstool. The earth is a footstool. 12 tribes has success over their enemies, of course, with 12 tribes, Jews for Christ, it should say, in a sense. Okay? And the ones who follow Satan will be crushed. So it's really the context of wheat and tares. Well, it's 22:44, so Mark 12:36. That should be 44. Alright, save that. Yep, sometimes it's just a little dyslexic. Oh, but notice it's also in Hebrews 10:13. So that will be the next use of it. So, at any rate, but it's about the 12 tribes. He'll help the ones who trust on him, and he'll judge the others. So that's the context. So, back down to Hebrews. Alright, we were just there. Now, the next one's 2:8. And it's also a cross reference. And it's crosses to Mark 12:36. The same context in a sense then as this Psalms 110 about the footstool. Alright, well let's look at that. So we're at 113, 114, so now the next verse is chapter 2. Alright, it says then, so all his points he just made about Christ being a blessing to the 12 tribes, redeeming the Jews for Christ. So in chapter 2 he says, for this reason we ought especially to attend to what must be listened to, lest we should ever be drawn aside or led off into error, in other words. For if the message delivered by messengers was reliable, and every transgression and disobedience received just punishment. So the message delivered by angels, in other words, was reliable. So it's talking about prophecies. So in other words, if these old prophecies, which he just pointed out, are about Christ, because everything we looked at already here was just basically a prophecy, right? About things to come. Christ in the first or second coming. Either way you want to look at it. They're all prophecies. So if that was reliable, and they know it was because he's already came and been resurrected, okay? How shall we escape if we neglect such a great salvation, who first received our information through the Lord with confirmation to us of what was heard, God witnessing with signs, wonders, and various powers, as well as Holy Spirit apportioned by His will. Okay, but some of these things, he's talking about things that they may have witnessed if they witnessed Christ being resurrected, but also he's saying the prophecies were reliable. So all these things that happened to the 12 tribes in Egypt then would have been reliable, because that's kind of where we went back to. Went back to them, the signs and wonders when they came out of Egypt. So he's saying if that was taught by prophets and so forth, Moses, prophets, and Psalms, right? So if that was in there, then that's reliable. So everything they've got in these scriptures then is reliable. Like Christ said, couldn't be set aside. Scripture couldn't be set aside. That was his argument to the Pharisees. Okay. For he is not subjected to messengers, the empire of the future, about what we speak. Oh yeah, to other angels, in other words. It's about Christ. The empire of the future is about Christ, not just to angels. And he gives evidence of this where someone says, what is man that you should remember him, or a son of man that you should look on him? You made him for a short time less than the angels, but have crowned him with majesty and honor, and set him over the works of your hands. Okay, well, when he was a man, in other words, he was a short time less than the angels. But then once he was resurrected, he's crowned with majesty and honor, set him over the works of your hands, have subjected all beneath his feet, which was the prophecy of Psalms 110. Okay? And then that quotes Psalms 8:4, which I said should follow the same context of Psalms 110. So let's look at Psalms 8:4. Yeah, what is it? 8:4-6. Okay. All right. Psalm of David. Jehovah our God, how glorious your hand. That's where it starts out. Over all earth you made, and over heaven your fame. From the mouths of sucklings and babes receive strength to turn back the rebels, conquer your foes. The rebels are Jews against Christ. When I look at the sky that your fingers have made, with the moon and stars you have formed, what is man that you think about him? What is Adam's son that you regard, which would be the Son of Man, in other words, Christ? You depressed him below all your saints, then crowned him with honor and might. You placed him over the works of your hand. You put all things under his feet, all flocks, herd, beasts of the field, birds of heaven, blah, blah, blah. How glorious is your name? That kind of sums up 8. Part of that goes back to Matthew 21, and then we got multiple cross-references. So if we went to our other chart, we'd see that this went to 1 Corinthians, Ephesians, and other verses. It's quoted multiple places. Okay. And then, of course, if you go to 9, it talks about the wicked tribes, how he judged them. Okay. And we got Christ as the scepter, the shield, and so forth. So basically saying Christ is an angel, but above all the angels, if you want to look at it that way, because he's above all the people that God created. Okay, so we're back to 2:8. So we got 12, we got a bunch of 13. Okay. But if he subjected all, that's verse 8, we could leave nothing unsubjected. However, we do not now see all subject to him. So all is not subject to Christ. You don't see that. Because they still see all this wickedness in the synagogues, and they're still under control of Rome and all that. Okay? But we see Jesus depressed for a short time lower than the angels by having suffered death, crowned with majesty and honor, since by the kindness of God he tasted death for all. Yeah, all 12 tribes, not all of the world. Well, in a sense, okay. It can be all the world. It really doesn't, doesn't have to be restricted. Because like I said, he can save anybody he desires. So it can be all the world. It's just the Bible contains the story to the 12 tribes, because that's the context of what Scripture is about. There might be other books about other people and other races and so on, but it's not here. For it became him by whom all are and through whom all exist, leading many sons to rectification, or to perfect the chief of their salvation by sufferings. Right. Many sons, so these are sons of God. So remember, use the term children of God and so forth, yes. So, but those children of God, in context, when you look at it, they're all interconnected and intertwined by cross-references and quotes, and context being 12 tribes when he talks about children of God. And generally, he's talking about the ones that believe on him, not the ones that disbelieve, right? Okay. For the purified and the purified are both from one, for which reason he is not ashamed to call them brothers, saying, I will proclaim your name to my brothers in the midst of the assembly, I will sing of you. So who is he talking to then about these sons of rectification? Well, that would be Psalms 22:22. Oh, I said Christ redeems the 12 tribes when crucified. Well, then these sons of rectification, if that's correct. But then he says, and again, I will trust in him. And he quotes Psalms 18. And then, behold myself and the children who God has given me. And that's Isaiah. So, all three of these, he's talking about the same thing. Alright. So, then let's look at Psalms 22, 18:2, and Isaiah 8:18. Although I've already wrote it down here, so it all looks like 12 tribes to me. Let's see how fast we can do this. Psalms 22. Alright, 22:22. Oh yeah. Yeah, well, here's people formed in the womb. So when you start back, it looks like it's talking a lot about Christ himself. Even though it's enthroned on Israel's praise, it's verse 4. Our fathers hoped on you. So there you go, it's about Christ. They hoped and you relieved. Really, so if it's about Christ and they're saying our fathers hoped on you, meaning they talked about the forefathers. I said before, yeah, they knew about Christ. They just didn't have that name. They knew about the King of Righteousness, and that's who they hoped on. Our fathers hoped on the King of Righteousness. And you relieved them, in other words, as Christ the shield, Christ the rock. So when they relieved them, you gave them water in the desert, you gave them food and manna and all that. We've already been through that. So yes, that's who they're talking about. They shrieked, you set free. It says that multiple times. He judged them and then brought them back out, redeemed them, whatever. But I'm a worm, not a man. Men despise, the people scorn. All sing, laugh, and mock. They sneer and shake the head. He hoped Jehovah would relieve. Now let him save him if he chose. Well, that's what they said to Christ when he was on the cross. That was Matthew 27:40. Yet you brought from the womb, placed on my mother's knees. On you I trusted from my birth, my God, from my mother's breast. Leave not in distress, come near to give me aid. 10,000 bulls surround the beasts of Bashan close. So that's the idea of the really the Jews against Christ who killed them, all banded together. They're called the beast. Sting mouths for me. In other words, save yourself. You said you would save the world, but you can't save yourself, right? The lions tear and roar. Like water I'm poured out, my bones torn from their joints, my heart become like wax. So on, they pierce my hands and feet. Verse 17, yeah, so we're talking about Christ. I can count all my bones, they strain and stare at me. Amongst them, they share my clothes, and for my robe cast dice. Again, crosses to Matthew 27:36 and John 19:24. So we know all that. Clearly about Christ. But you, Lord, not far. My God, oh, hast helped my lifeguard from the sword, my darlings from the dog. In other words, guarding me from these beasts he just talked about. Save from the lion's mouth, protect from tossing horns. And then I'll tell my friends your name. In other words, when Christ is resurrected, and think among the crowd. So that's Christ's friends. And the name would be Yahweh, or maybe Elohim, or whatever. Look on the Lord and praise. All Jacob's race extol. That's verse 24. And Israel's race adore. Okay, well, it's specific to the talking to Jacob's race, Israel's race, 12 tribes. You couldn't get anything else out of that than the 12 tribes. Telling the 12 tribes to adore him. It's not talking to the world. It's no worldly context. Okay, so he didn't hide his face. Pay vows, poor shall eat and feed. Who seek the Lord, give thanks. Revive your hearts, reflect, trust the Lord. The whole land bows to you with all the pagan tribes, because the Lord is king. He's over the heathen, rules over the heathen. They all shall eat and bow, all great. Bow on earth to him, kneel in the dust. A race shall serve to us. Okay, that's the idea of Zechariah 14. Prince declares to me, who goes and tells his plans. In other words, prophecies to men as yet unborn. So context is all about Christ. Israel's started out being Israel's praise, and then over here in 24, Israel's race. So as Christ redeems the 12 tribes. Alright, Psalms 18:2. Back up to 18. It says by David, okay, who addressed the words of this song to the ever-living at a time when the ever-living had rescued him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul. He says, I love you, Lord, my strength, the Lord, my rock and fort, my safe retreat. I trust in him, my shield, my savior, horn of salvation, tower. Okay, so all that's Christ the shield, Christ the stone, Christ the scepter. When weak I cried to God, who saved me from my foes. Okay. So covered that. Alright, and then he talks about the whirlwinds, flashing fire, didn't turn. Just talking about Jews against Christ versus Jews for Christ. I'm just trying to read through, see if there's anything else specific here. Talking about the haters, Christ the rock, singing to the Lord to nations, it might say Gentiles. Then it quotes Romans 15:1. And here again, I said if you look up on the other chart and then go back to the quotes in the New Testament, which can also give you context if it's not definitive. But if you go to, you might have to go up one or two chapters. You always see Jacob, Israel, in the context, even if it's not in the chapter you're in. But it's people who follow his law, and those are the ones he redeems, in other words. So, Again, you got more about Christ if you just back up. But I guess the best context is the end of 14. 14:2, for example, the Lord looked down from heaven on the children of Adam, see if they would follow their God, speaking of him, right? But then when you get to 7, who gives from Zion, gives Israel victory from Zion. When the Lord from captivity brings back his race, then Jacob will laugh, Israel will be glad. There you go. There's an absolute context. The end of 14, that we're talking about the 12 tribes being brought back from captivity after they were judged. So like I say, you can't always get perfect definitive idea right where you're at. Now, if you back up to 8:18, so go back. All right. Well, we were already in 8. Oh, that's Isaiah. Huh. Thought, hey, there's 9:18 here. Okay. There you go. Alright, so we've been to 8 and 9 and so forth, but so we had Emmanuel in 7:14 just before, okay, and then I mentioned that was an end time context. Okay, then we get to 8. Call his name, have a son. And it talks about Emmanuel in 8 and 9. Collect together you nations, but you shall be broken. Arm yourselves, but you shall be broken. Decide a united scheme. In other words, military coalition. It shall not succeed, for God is with us. For thus has said my living God, who holds me with his hand, kept me from walking in the path this people take, and say, confirm no treaty with all whom the people wish to treat, nor fear their dread and terror. The Lord of hosts revere and fear. He was your trust and hope. He was the one revered, now stumbling block and rock to fall. So here's Christ, the stone of stumbling, rock of offense, on both of Israel's homes. So the context, 8:18, is that the Jews for Christ. So it's all about the 12 tribes, in other words, in verse 14 and so forth, 15. The Jews against Christ are caught as a snare when they stumble over Christ, right? So you get down to, so that's 15. 16, bind up the evidence and press the law upon my students. These would be Jews for Christ, right? Of both of Israel's homes, right? And I will wait for the ever-living, who's hidden his face from the house of Jacob. So there's 12 tribes again. But I will wait for him, for I and the children the ever-living has given to me, given to Christ, in other words, are signs and warnings to Israel from the Lord of hosts. Okay. Dwelling on Mount Zion. So, pretty specific. These are those of the 12 tribes who have the law on their hearts, or the idea of the second coming, like I said in Hebrews 8:8, which we're getting to shortly. So it's the Jews for Christ. They're given the stone, the shield, and the rock. And I say that also crosses 1 Peter 3:14, same context. Should not a people rather go to its God, to the living, not to the dead, or to the law and its evidence? That's 19. Okay, so it's talking about Jews for Christ versus Jews against Christ, in other words. And that's how it kind of leads into chapter 9, which is this nation which will see Christ. Light will appear to them, but it says Gentiles in Matthew 4:16. However, it's telling you it's Jews against Christ. It just said right here. So they change it is to meaning non-Israelites, but we just read it's a stumbling block on house of Judah, house of Israel. And then we get to chapter 9, it's about judgment day, end of all war and all that, and then it goes right back to Jacob in verse 7. So just before, just after, so it's 12 tribes. So it has, the context has to be 12 tribes. It can't just change to Gentiles, non-Israelites in the middle of prophecy. Okay? So let's knock off here. We'll go to the next video and continue from 3:11. All right, thanks.